Jeff Berkowitz, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel as we're going to take a bit of an in-depth look at the run for the mayor of Chicago. And before we get down to the last two candidates and what some of the issues are going to be, let's start back up a little bit. We had an election just recently. There was something like 10 candidates. I didn't count them all. But some of the major ones that people thought were going to be in the final round didn't make it. So give us a quick overview of what happened in the initial election, and then we can move on to what's going to be coming up April 2nd.
Okay, Terry, there were 14 candidates, but the top two, most people who know this said the top two were Bill Daley and Toni Preckwinkle. The two most raised the most money. Bill Daley almost $9 million, Preckwinkle almost $5 million, and then you start talking twos and threes and less. And then just the name recognition. Daley. Everybody, like Chicago, what name do you think of? Daley. Daley. Mayor Richard J. Daley. Mayor Richard M. Daley. Now Bill Daley. The Daley family. Get it? So he had to be the favorite because of the money and the name recognition and the polling. He was a little low. The next person, Preckwinkle. Toni Preckwinkle, 20 years as a Chicago alderman, and then also a Cook County Board president, which is really Chicago, for 8 years. Okay, so they know the name Preckwinkle, they know the name Daley. She had $5 million, he had $9 million. Hey, the big surprise, Terry, Daley didn't make it. It's win, place, and show, but that's only in horses. Showing doesn't count. He was a show horse, not a workhorse. He came in third with 15% of the vote. Little known candidate, Lori Lightfoot, she came in first, 17% of the vote. Preckwinkle slipped to second, 16. Daley 15, he's out of it. Because if you don't get 50%, then you have a runoff between the top two. So it's Lightfoot at 17%, it's Preckwinkle at 16%. That's the runoff. That'll be April 2nd, just 30 days from when we're taping this, okay? And this is gonna be an exciting race. So that's how we got there.
Well, why didn't Daley make the final round? You say it was a relatively close race between him and Lori Lightfoot, right? So we got down to the top two, and as I understand it, they could have elected a mayor of Chicago if one of them had gotten 50% of the vote, but neither did, and which is not surprising when you have so many candidates. Yeah. So everyone knew there was going to be a runoff, but I think, as you just said, people were surprised that Daley didn't get in one of the top two spots. And obviously people would not have put all those millions of dollars toward his campaign if they thought he wasn't going to make the cut. So what actually kept Bill Daley, former White House chief of staff, in addition to being the son and brother of a past mayors of Chicago, what kept him out of there?
Well, it was the negative ads. Why were there negative ads? He was the only one of 14 candidates talked about real pension reform, which is the 800-pound gorilla, which is the thing that the most troublesome thing for Chicago, its financial condition because of its pension mess. And so only one of 14 candidates really had something, I would say, to deal with it, which is you amend the Illinois Constitution, which in short allows you to start negotiating with the unions. If you don't amend the Constitution, there's almost nothing you can do to reduce the pension benefits. And Daley, Bill Daley, to his credit, took that on. He said, you know, if you're serious about this, he called it a $28 billion anchor around the Chicago taxpayers or Chicago citizens' neck. It's really more like, I would say, 42 billion or 70 billion. But that was the point. He upset who? The unions, okay? They started, one in particular, started running negative ads about that. And so he was the only candidate who had negative ads coming at him. And why? Because he took on the pension issue. There are other factors we can go into, but that is why, that offset the name recognition. He was known, but some of it was bad known, okay? So in a nutshell, and you could say, if you said number two, some people thought we've had too much Daley. Daley, for the last 65 years, we've had a Daley in the mayor's chair for 44. If you look at it another way, you could say 52. Daley, time for change. That's why Lori Lightfoot came in and surpassed Preckwinkle, because she was not a part of the political leadership. She had not been an alderman like Preckwinkle.
So do you think that like Donald Trump was elected in part because he was an outsider and people wanted a break from the past? Is that one of the reasons that Lori Lightfoot has now made the cut?
Absolutely, Terry. You're right. Because Trump was a part of something international. Lori Lightfoot was a part of something national, perhaps international. When she won that night and they were cheering her and she was giving her victory speech, she said, "Look around you. This is what change looks like." Okay? And remember 2008 with Barack Obama? I know you knew Barack well. Change, Terry. Trump. Change. People keep looking for this and they don't get it. Some say, not to digress, other than to say, some say a lot of Trump voters were Obama voters who didn't get the change they wanted. And so that's what we go into this race with Lori Lightfoot carrying the banner of change and Preckwinkle carrying the banner of, she just ran a negative ad, Preckwinkle did, right after the election. Now she's going to tell you about the real Lori Lightfoot, and she's going to say you're not going to like that.
So what are the major, first of all, on Preckwinkle, how is she viewed, would you say, at large? Is she viewed in the context of she has governmental experience, she's run a major government in Cook County, and therefore we should have her experience? Or is it more of the mindset that maybe brought Lori Lightfoot, as we discussed in, that people might view Preckwinkle as someone who already has associations with people, power sources in the city, that they would rather not pick up those influences, and maybe they want to just have a clean break from the past, and so they go with the Lori Lightfoot instead of the person who's already been holding office?
Preckwinkle has to straddle that fence. You're right. She wants to emphasize her organizational ability. She's run a $5 million person Cook County, which includes the 2.8 million from Chicago. She's done that, but she's been a politician. She started out as a reformer. People say now she's a part of the political leadership. She's not changed, and there was corruption. Ed Burke, 50 years an alderman, chairman of the finance committee, more powerful perhaps than the mayor, basically was indicted. It was a criminal complaint filed by the feds accusing him of shakedown. She'd gotten oodles and oodles of money from that Burke had raised for her when she was running just a few months ago for Cook County Board President. So she has that Burke connection, which is not good. Okay, so the more she talks about her Cook County Board experience, which she wants to, the more people will start saying, wait a second, this isn't what we want, because Chicago is pay to play. In a sense, she's a part of pay to play. She's a part of the Chicago machine. So that's the tension. She will try to make the point you said, but the more she does that, she opens herself up to the Lightfoot criticism. Hey, that ain't the change you want, folks. We're ready for reform. We're ready to do it differently. That's why you put me in here. So
let me ask relative to, we touched base on the Mayor Daley, or not Mayor, Bill Daley rather. We
right.
touched base on his talking about the pensions. I want to hear about what do you think are some of the major issues that are resonating now that we're down to Toni Preckwinkle and Lori Lightfoot. But I'm curious, before, is pensions, to what extent do the average people, the voters of Chicago, are they aware of the dire problem the city faces because of pensions? To what extent are pensions and the unfunded liabilities within those pension systems, is that an issue, or is this focus going to be somewhere else?
It should be, but so far from the initial discussions from the pundits, the journalists, they don't go there first. They go to education, which people talk about. CPS had reform in 95 to 2001, got somewhat better, then has had troubled issues in the last 4 or 5 years. Major school closings. They've lost 70,000 students. They've left for the suburbs, left elsewhere. So they have all this excess capacity. Rahm, to his credit, said it's inefficient to have schools that are open and operating at 20% capacity. He closed 50 schools. basically both these people ran on you shouldn't have closed any schools. Doesn't make any sense, but politically extremely popular. Also, both are black females. The school closings occurred in the black areas. That's where the excess capacity was. So what did they talk about? Mike Flannery, one of the pundits here in Chicago, talking to Lori Lightfoot just this week after the election, says, you got these schools, excess capacity, you had to close them. She says, no, you shouldn't have closed them. Without going into all that, you can see education. Number two, we are the murder capital of the country. Way more than New York, which got a lot better, way more than Los Angeles. Chicago is the murder homicide capital of the country, and we can't ever get the murderer. And that in these areas where most of these things occur, because the murders are mostly on the south and west sides, the minority low-income areas, we have a closing rate when there's a homicide, gun use with a homicide, fatality, 17%. That's just to prosecute. We only prosecute and go after, 17%. How many actually go to jail or prison? Who knows? So that's what Flannery's saying. You got to get the murderers, thinking that if you get them, maybe there will be fewer murders. But that gets you into what is the relationship with the community in these low-income areas with the police. Well, you know what that's like. That's a nationwide issue. So what am I talking about, Terry? I'm talking about homicides, violence, and that creeps up to Michigan Avenue, which you've been at, Terry. You know the latest thing in the last few days after the election? These thieves are coming up and taking cell phones out of the hands of a 70-year-old, out of a 40. They just take it out of your hand. Because think about it, Terry. If you've got a cell phone and you're calling, where's your phone? It's in your hand.
To what extent is that resonating? And where the people... I suspect, and I think this is true in most communities around the country, that people, rightly or wrongly, feel, as long as the crime stays in the crime sector of the city, it's not impacting me. But once the crime starts coming up Michigan Avenue, the Magnificent Mile, the world-famous shopping area, then that starts to get people's attention. So to what extent is crime now moved to the forefront? Is it or is it not? Has crime become one of the key issues?
Yeah, it has. Michigan Avenue is the jewel. That's where people come from all over, the water tower place and so forth. They come from Springfield. They come from Boston. That's where they go.
They come all over the world, yeah.
When you all over the world, when you start getting crime there, your tourism goes later. The business community that poured like $9 million into Bill Daley, including $2 million alone from Ken Griffin from Citadel, $2 million from one person. That's where when you do that, screw it, Chicago's over. And that's happening off and on for the last 5 years. You get these crash mobs coming down like in September, October, and then they send some police out there, they walk and it goes away. But Terry, you've heard this saying, if you have a bad neighborhood, whatever it is, and you do nothing, eventually that bad neighborhood finds you. And that's what's happening. Yes, the worst part is on the south and the west side. We read about these things if we're in the other areas. We're concerned about it. And even without it coming to Michigan Avenue, it's a concern, Terry. I mean, people who don't even live in Chicago, they want Chicago to be better because they work there. They visit there. And, the south side and the west side is not that far away. And actually, Terry, they care. People who are in the suburbs who are white care about blacks and Hispanics who are low income, want their education to be better, want their safety to be better. We are a society that actually cares. We don't just say, okay, I'm here on the North Shore, I don't care. So no, Terry, they care. And it is a tremendously difficult problem to deal with. Emanuel couldn't deal with it. He had the Laquan McDonald thing. We won't go into it unless you ask. Going into this race, I thought there would be two issues. Laquan McDonald, CPS rapes. Actually, neither came up a lot during this election for various reasons, but it is there, Terry. It is there. We could do a whole show on those two issues another time, but it manifests itself in the two issues they are talking about. Crime, homicides, that's one issue. Education, Maybe they get to the third issue, which is the uneven economic development across the city. Everybody talked in Rahm's terms about the shiny city. Rahm had a shiny city that attracted investment and capital to the Loop, to the near north, to the Gold Coast, these nice areas on the north side, to Lincoln Park, okay? But once you get out to like Inglewood and the south side, or the west side where the United Center is, these buildings are boarded up from the 1968 riots. Another topic. Yes, the 1968 riots when the city was almost burned down. You go out to the west side, you see stores that are boarded up 50 years ago, Terry. So Lightfoot is talking about that. She did during selection, so did Preckwinkle. There are 77 neighborhoods in Chicago, Terry, and there are at least 20 or 30, maybe more of those that are terrible in terms of high unemployment. There are areas of these areas where you have 50%.
Well, let me interject as time grows short here. You know, one of the things I would say, and this is probably, I like as someone who just also likes to observe politics and why a population selects certain candidates is telling. One of the things I think is interesting about this, and almost, you know, I mean, people maybe talk about it off camera, but let's talk about it on camera. You know, you have two women, right? It's been very rare. I think we've only had one woman mayor of Chicago, Jane Byrne, and that was 30 years ago or so, 35 years ago.
And it didn't end well, did it? Okay, so yes.
Well, so and we only had, as I recall, one black mayor before, with Harold Washington, right?
We had several, Eugene Sawyer and perhaps one or two others, but Harold Washington was certainly the most notable black mayor.
So now we're going to have, we're going to have a woman, we're going to have a black, and in Lori Lightfoot, at least as a candidate, she's also out publicly as a lesbian, which I'm just saying, it says a lot about our society that these are the candidates, and you know, someone like Lori Lightfoot, probably both of these candidates would not have been considered 30 years ago in the era of, you know, when Richie Daley was getting elected.
There would not have been a member of the LGBT plus, as they call it now, LGBTQ community. There wasn't even when Richard J. Daley was there from 1955 to 76. There was no such thing as an LGBT community. And so that you have an actual member who is not, who is publicly known that way. She is married to another woman. They have a 11-year church. When she accepted this victory, that day was her daughter's 11th birthday, and she was there. Nobody's hiding that, okay? That is all out.
Which again, maybe is not a major thing, but I think it's interesting just that sometimes you want to stand back. The evolution of a society is typically in slow motion, and sometimes we just don't even stop to think about just how radically different America is today, and the attitude of the electorate that they don't care. I don't think they care that they're women. I don't think they care that they're black, and I don't think, probably for the majority of people, they don't care that Lori Lightfoot is a lesbian. I think what they care about are the issues we're talking about. What are you going to do about the schools? What are you going to do about fixing the financial situation of the city? And what are you going to do about the level of crime and ensuring that we have safe neighborhoods? Would I be right on that?
Yes, and as I said, they're not going to the pension issue, which is the financial issue. They weren't even going in this first week to the economic development across the various neighborhoods. But Terry, the pension issue is there, and here's how it comes up. Even if they don't address it, directly, they have pension payments that they have to make. In 4 years, the amount of money Chicago puts into its pensions will statutorily have to go from its current $1.2 billion to $2.2 billion. So what does that do, Terry? If you have a budget and you've got to spend $1 billion more on something, that means you're spending less on something else. The pensions are starting to crowd out this money for education, which is already in trouble, and it's starting to crowd out the money for crime. Sounded familiar, Terry? You know Springfield like the back of your hand. You know the pensions there are crowding out the spending on health care, on Medicaid, on education. It's the crowd out effect. So if you don't deal with this, which you should on its own, because the city's going bankrupt, the pensions are going bankrupt, If you don't do it for that reason, just the payments itself, the math, crowds out the things we're talking about. You can't talk, several of the candidates, including these, ran on you need more detectives. For some reason, number of detectives. So you may need more police, not just to, well, you can't have more police if you've got pensions that are using up more of your budget. What does the city do? It provides law and order, police and fire. Those are the two major pension funds in the city. The other one is the city employees, something like 30,000 employees. I haven't even gotten to the Chicago CPS. People say it's separate, but of course it's CPS is Chicago Public Schools.
And to what extent did you say, I believe you said that generally speaking, the voters of Chicago are not focusing on the pension problem. Is that what you were saying?
Well, Terry, when you try to talk about it on the state side, you've been at press conferences where somebody starts talking about it. You've seen, these are even the press, let alone the citizens, their eyes gloss over. People went into journalism because they couldn't do math. People do other things because they can't do math. You think it would be really popular if you're a politician said, okay, folks, you're here to see me. We're here at this rally. Let me really get you jazzed up talking about the, $70 billion pension hole. Boy, that's a good way to turn on the audience. But you have to do it if you want to solve it. It will be an interesting question to see how much that issue is discussed directly in the next month. These are progressives. Both of them say they're progressive. So how does a progressive solve the pension issue if you don't want to decrease pension benefits?
Yeah, and I would just say...
Last to mention, it's an important point.
I would say, look, the good news on one hand for Chicago is that you now have a Mayor Pritzker who is going to be more amenable to considering policies that would help Chicago out. But the state budget of Illinois is also being gobbled up by pensions. So Pritzker doesn't have a whole lot of money sitting on the side that's just free available cash. Around 2002, pension payments for the state budget were only about 5% of the state budget. Now they're 21%. And it's happening at the state level, that we can't fix our bridges, we can't fix our roadways, we can't do any number of things because so much of our money is now being diverted to pay for the obligations and pay for the people that worked for the state 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago.
Terry, you raise a very good point. Just let me, because a slip of the tongue, but it was actually significant. You said Mayor Pritzker. Of course, it's Governor Pritzker, but he is from Chicago. His base is in Chicago. It's Mike Madigan, and Mike is the unions, Chicago unions. And the reason why that's important, Terry, both of these candidates for mayor, Lori Lightfoot, Toni Preckwinkle, they ran on Springfield and Governor Pritzker getting a progressive income tax. And then they even sometimes call it, one of the ones who didn't win, Paul Vallis, said, we need a progressive agenda. That means City of Chicago goes knocking at Springfield. Now you say there's no money for Chicago from Governor Pritzker because he ain't got it. But they're thinking if he gets a progressive income tax, some say we're talking about $10 billion more in revenue. Some say they think you get it from the rich. Others say can't do that. You get it from middle class. Then Chicago wants what they call their share of that new revenue, that progressive income tax. Doesn't help them for probably a year or two, but then if they get it. So you see the interaction, Terry. You see what we're talking about in Chicago directly involved with what people are focusing on Springfield. If you don't get that progressive income tax, and you may not, you have to amend the Constitution, well, then there's no pot. I mean, then surely, I think you would agree, Terry, Springfield's not going to have some more money for Chicago, are they, if they don't get a progressive income tax?
I think because 2/3 of the legislature is from the Chicago area, because you have almost all of, or I think all of the statewide office holders, like Kwame Raoul, like Susanna Mendoza, all of them are from the Chicago area. There's going to be a bias towards Chicago. Now they're talking about having more money from gaming, about putting a casino boat finally in Chicago, about recreational use of marijuana and what the state might get from that. But others are saying the numbers don't add up. You're not going to be able to get from here to there with these. Obviously, any new revenue is helpful, but it's a bit like, it's just too little, too late, and that you're going to have to have some structural reforms, as Bill Daley was talking about, to these pensions if you're ever really going to get a handle on it. So I say that also because the people around the state who are listening to this and might say, why do I care who's the mayor of Chicago? Why do you spend any time on a race for the mayor of Chicago? This is why. Chicago is sinking fast financially, and not only the city government, but also Chicago public schools are also facing bankruptcy, and there is going to be a huge amount of pressure brought on all of those people in the legislature and on the governor to save Chicago. That's their hometown. And the people downstate might say, let it sink. No one's going to be coming to bail out Decatur or Springfield or DeKalb. But Chicago is the economic engine of Illinois, and right now it's running out of money, and it's running out of money very quickly.
But you raise an important point, and I know we're running out of time. It's an important point. The Illinois legislature has the power to give cities and villages across the state of Illinois the power to file in a court for bankruptcy. Doesn't mean they'll get it, but they can at least ask the court to declare them bankrupt. And I think about half the states in the country actually have given their cities, their municipalities, their villages, the power to file for bankruptcy. So it's not like an abstract idea. And I think the Illinois legislature, some would say, should start thinking about this, because we've seen private companies, the airlines, file for bankruptcy, Terry, they get past it and they come back very strong. So the fact, and it's the threat of bankruptcy sometimes, if you have that power, which allow the city to get the unions to come sit at the table and negotiate with them to reduce their benefits, because if they don't, if there's bankruptcy filed, well, then the judge accepts a plan, and then the unions have to do what the judge says. So thinking long-term, Terry, again, there's interaction here between, as you just pointed out, Chicago is the engine of economic growth. Yes, agriculture and many things are important across the state, and it gives them a diversified economy. But without Chicago, which is 70% perhaps of the, often the voting and so forth, it's without Chicago, you got bupkis, as your grandmother would say, okay? Springfield is nice, Illinois is nice. Without Chicago, you don't have this economic growth spilling over. So people need to worry about this. They would need to worry outside of Chicago if it's financially prosperous. If it's not, how do they deal with these unions? Who is the mayor candidate who's the best to deal with it? Should Springfield be thinking about giving the cities and villages the power for bankruptcy?
Well, there has been some discussion. It's never gone anywhere. Ron Sandak, Republican from Downers Grove area, when he was a member of the legislature, I think tried to get a bill or introduced a bill. It just didn't go anywhere to allow that to happen. And, we'll point out, let me just point out that Detroit has declared bankruptcy. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the capital of Pennsylvania, went into bankruptcy. Orange County, Vallejo, California, also went into bankruptcy. I said Orange County, California, I should say. All of these went into bankruptcy, and all of them went into bankruptcy in large part for the same reason. Pensions. The pensions were not structured properly. The amount of benefits were way too high relative to the amount of money that had been put in to fund them. And so you just can't put $10 into a fund and pull $100 out. They don't, eventually the numbers don't work. Now how either of these two candidates are going to face this, I don't know. I do think it's something from my standpoint that ought to be part of the conversation, whether it is or not, whether it will be or not between now and April 2nd. I don't know, but we also have the reality that people are leaving the state. They're leaving Chicago. They're leaving downstate. And a lot of people are like, I'm not going to be, it's a game of musical chairs. I don't want to be the last one here to have to pay for all the drinks at the table, so to speak. And so people are incentivized currently with these financial problems to leave the state because they don't want it to be impacted. And one of the things, by the way, too, that there is some discussion about, and it's probably a lot of these issues the candidates would want to keep out of the election, is the state of Illinois does not tax retirement income. We're one of the few states that don't. And there is a discussion also about starting to tax retirement income. Some people estimate that might bring in another $2 billion into the state. So things for the voters to also consider.
Jerry, remember, people can leave. So if people here in Illinois have retirement income and they can go, there are many states that don't, or if they do, the overall tax is lower. That's what they care about. If you're here in Illinois and you're paying a much higher overall tax, property, income, retirement, the whole thing, than you are in Texas, than you are in Go. And so you can raise, and these people who estimate all this money they're going to get from retirement, trust me, I know that. They don't estimate they just say, here, we got a certain number of people, they get the retirement income, we tax it, we get it. No, wrong. When you give people incentive to leave, they do. So you ask that person, did you count the 20%, 30% loss of retirees you're going to lose? Because you are. And so that is, none of these things are panaceas. Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. But you cannot, without major reforms of your pensions, you can't exist as a state. And there ain't no politician who's stood up and said, the closest was Bill Daley, and guess what? They want him. But two quick things. Harvey is a city, not a big city. As you know, because they weren't putting money into their pensions, the pension fund fiduciaries have the right and maybe the obligation under the current Illinois law to petition the comptroller to intercept funds that they had raised property taxes in Harvey to go to their police. They petitioned the comptroller. She stopped that money from going to the police in Harvey or the city government to pay the police, and she sent it to the pension fund, which means you saw this direct trade-off. Money into the pension funds, they had to cut their police source by half. This was Harvey. Do you think this could happen in Chicago? The point is...
Well, it could happen in Chicago. And the other thing is, about 5 years ago, we had the speech from the City Club of Chicago where the finance director for the city at that time, I don't remember who the name, but I do remember what she said, which was, we have enough money right now to pay for those police officers and firefighters who are currently retired. We do not have enough money to pay the pensions of those who are currently working. And that was true 5 years ago. Nothing that I know of has been done to change or reform the system.
They're
and so it's something that's hanging over.
Yeah, if you look at this, and Moody's tracks these things, pretty much Chicago is now at junk bond status. And they look at the assets you have in your funds, the amount you pay out. I think we're starting some of these funds to start looking at, we're now to 4 or 5 years. We once were up like 12 or 13. So it is catching up. You're getting this trade-off. And the last thing, maybe the last thing, is that the other people in this race are important because, Toni only got 16%. Lori's got 16. Lori had 17%. She's got to find, to win this thing, like 30 to 33% more. They both have to. And guess what? Bill Daley had 16%. Or 15%. If Daley can control those people and they come knocking, Bill, will you support me? Well, then he's got a block. Willie Wilson, little known, came in fourth with 10%. And basically those are almost all black voters, many on the south side of Chicago. What does Willie say? It's interesting for a black person coming in fourth place. He says, I don't want any more taxes. I don't want you to raise taxes, okay? No taxes. That actually resonated.
What about Paul Vallis, who a lot of people would say is the most credible person on economic issues, having run several large school districts. He ran, didn't do very well, but has anyone talked about bringing him, either of the candidates talked about bringing Paul Vallis? I don't know if he would accept the position, but bringing him in as a counselor or someone who's
Well, I asked Paul that actually a week before the election and said, Paul, you know, what about a team of rivals? If you don't win, Paul, if it were Preckwinkle, if it were Lightfoot, and they offered you, you know, a job, you don't need the job, but the opportunity to take some of, because as they said, the notable thing is, you just point out with Vallis, whatever the problem is, Paul's got a plan for the problem, and he developed it. He didn't turn to his staff. So, and he has a plan on pensions, and without amending the Constitution, he has a plan. He rebuilt education before. He could do it again. And all Paul said was, you know, Jeff, no, I'm not looking for a job. I'm going to win this, and so forth. So your question is, would they offer it to him, and would he take it? And I don't know, but it was, the other thing about Paul, he had about there are 5 people. So we said Daley, we said Wilson have about a quarter of the vote. That's still made, but not, if they divide that up, that's not enough. So you go to the next 5 people who've got about 30 to 40%, mostly in the 6 to 8% each range, including Paul Vallis. He brings you a block. So this 30-day period, you go out to the people, but you're also knocking on the doors of the people who ran and now have, you know, a block of 6 to 8% once you get past Daley and Wilson. But it is all, it's all to the good. You and I believe in competition. Now we've got competition among 2 people. Everybody says they should be the same. They're progressives. Maybe we'll see a new kind of progressive, because guess what? They now both have problems to deal with.
I will say that I'm not sure why anyone would want the job right now. From my perspective, it's almost as if someone's volunteering to be a kamikaze pilot, because they running this city is not the same as it was 50 years ago. I mean, this is the city's finances are horrific, and I'm not sure that anyone. I just don't know what the answers are, but I wish them well, because Chicago's an important part not only of Illinois but of the United States, and we need to have that city continuing to operate. It used to be called the city that works. I'm not so sure to what extent it's working at present, and whatever reforms are going to be made, we're running out of time, so I'm going to close it out here, but whatever reforms need to be made are going to have to be made very quickly, because whoever is the next mayor of Chicago does not have the luxury of time on their side.
But one thing to say, you're not sure why they would want it. Rahm Emanuel left chief of staff to Obama to become mayor of Chicago 8 years ago, I think with the idea, if he did well, we had problems then. If he did well, he then runs for president. It may sound crazy, it's not the usual launching pad, but if Preckwinkle, or especially Lori Lightfoot, because she's somewhat younger, would do well as mayor of Chicago and fix all these problems, guess what? She's an instant possibility for president of the United States. Don't you think, Terry?
I would not agree with that, but I think there's a long. I don't even want to go there. I think that's putting the cart way before the horse. I think what we need to find out is can whoever is elected turn this city around at the same time we're needing to turn this state around. And very many people that I've talked to over the years, responsible people, don't believe that it can be turned around. They think the reforms are going to be too little too late, and that, frankly, bankruptcy for Chicago is probably the only ultimate answer. And the city's going to go to that answer kicking and screaming and delaying as they kind of thrash about trying to have reforms. Now, that's what a lot of people, it's not me saying this, it's what responsible people off camera will say. And they just don't think it's, the political will is there to do what needs to be done. Maybe Bill Daley would have done it. Maybe he would have had the support. But that's how a lot of people see this election and where we are at this point in history for the city of Chicago.
To close on a bright note, hope growth, and opportunity. If you can do reforms, if you can do these reforms, which include pensions and education and violence and economic prosperity across the 77 neighborhoods, hope, growth, and opportunity. Terry, as you know, the Art Institute, the Field Museum, the Lakefront, the Hancock, Willis Tower, okay? It's a great city, Terry. It's here for the plucking. You could bring people. Bill Daley noted we lost 300,000 people in population. He wanted to bring them back. We lost more. He said 400,000, mostly middle-class African Americans, have left the city. We need to attract business to Chicago. We need a politician, a political entrepreneur who thinks.
Yes, let me cut you off because we're already going a little bit longer than we should have, and you know, I'm sure we could talk for 2 hours on this, but I think relative to the election coming up in April, we flushed out. People know something about the candidates, and we wish them well, whoever it is. We wish the city well, and hopefully both the city and the state of Illinois can fix what needs to be fixed. Unfortunately, we've lost about the last 4 years. There was such political divisions between Governor Rauner and Speaker Madigan that just not a whole lot got done, and I think it was the conflict was the primary thing that got done over the last 4 years, and very little in the form of solution. But Jeff, we thank you for joining us, and to the extent that we can do this again sometime before the April 2nd election, we'd love to have you back.
Hope, growth, and opportunity. Thanks so much, Terry. Appreciate the opportunity. It's a good way to close out.
All right.
30 days to find hope, growth, and opportunity.
Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you later.